I am so happy to be here with all of you this evening. Thank you for taking your time to come together so that we can talk about some very important topics. We're living in a time that seems extraordinarily divisive and full of conflict. We may feel as if we are rubbed raw on all sides from time to time. It may even remind one of being caught in a grinder or a sifter. Surprisingly, the analogy of a sifter is a part of the ageless wisdom tradition, as we see from the following quotes from the voice of the silence. When a person carefully sifts and consciously discriminates, he or she works with nature without awaiting karma's disciplinary measures. And Great Sifter is the name of the heart doctrine, O disciple. And the voice of the silence continues, saying, the wheel of the good law moves swiftly on. It grinds on night and day. The worthless husks it drives from out the golden grain, the refuse from the flour. The hand of karma guides the wheel. The revolutions mark the beatings of the karmic heart. These quotes encompass a depth and breadth of theosophical concepts, touching on or implying a connection with almost all of the ageless wisdom teachings. Teachings that many have studied for lifetimes upon lifetimes. When we look at each of these concepts and drill down as deeply as possible, we find that each one leads us to the core of the ageless wisdom teachings. They lead us to what may be called the heart of theosophy. What is the heart of theosophy? The core of the ageless wisdom teachings? Well, from the perspective of many, the core of the ageless wisdom teachings is love. Now, many people tend to use the word love very casually. Actually, probably most of us do. We use it to indicate things that we like. I love this beautiful flower. I love being here with all of you. I love French fries. At other times, we use the words in a more personal way. I love my children. Interesting, isn't it? I don't love French fries the same way that I love my children. These are quite different feelings, yet we use the same terminology. Not that there's anything wrong with the casual or personal use of the word love. In fact, it probably makes us happy to think of the vibrations of love rippling across the world. However, these casual uses of the word, even love for family, which is a personal type of love, are not what we are discussing here. This is not the love that is at the core of life, at the heart of theosophy. The love that exists as the heart of theosophy is so much deeper and broader. G.D. Peruker, in his Golden Precepts of Esotericism, writes, love is the cement of the universe. It holds all things in place and in eternal keeping. Its very nature is celestial peace. Its very characteristic is cosmic harmony, permeating all things, boundless, deathless, infinite, eternal. It is everywhere and is the very heart of all that is. Deeper's statement sounds as if this type of love is a synonym for the ultimate reality, permeating all things, everywhere, and is the very heart of all that is. This love has no personal implications. Rather, it is a universal and impersonal type of love. It is a love that goes beyond anything we can imagine, except possibly in those few moments of meditation or intuitive leaps toward the divine. What we are talking about here is love beyond all measure for humanity. A specific type of love, agape love, as the Greeks used that word. Agape love can be defined as the highest form of love, a love that incorporates empathy, compassion, understanding, unconditional love, the love of the infinite for humanity, and the love of humanity for the infinite. Deeper, while not using the term agape, describes it for us saying that the more impersonal love is, the higher it is, and the more powerful. Impartial love is love that has no attachment. Once we have attachment, love for family, for instance, while it is a form of love, it is not universal love. In Sri Ram, former international president of the Theosophical Society, says, "The love which deserves that name is impartial, non-possessive, wholly beneficent. In that love alone is to be discovered the force which will ultimately bring humanity to its freedom." Love is the only force, he says, which does not create or add to the complications of karma. He goes on to say, without love, there is no unfoldment, because love belongs to the life of the spirit, to the real self. Without love, all search is in vain. Love that belongs to the life of the real self, as Sri Ram calls it, is often referred to as altruism or philanthropy in theosophical writings. Once again, these words are not used in a casual sense, but denote the highest form of altruism or philanthropy, service to humanity. The Mahatma K.H. writes, "The true theosophist is the philanthropist who, not for himself or herself, but for the world he or she lives." In the Key to Theosophy, H.P. Blavatsky tells us, "Every true theosophist is morally bound to sacrifice the personal to the impersonal, his own or her own present good to the future benefit of other people." She defined occultism, true occultism, as altruism. And she further tells us a true theosophist must put in practice the loftiest moral ideal, must strive to realize unity with the whole of humanity, and work ceaselessly for others. If we act altruistically, we put the needs of the whole before the needs of the self. When we recognize the essential unity of all life, we realize that what happens to one of us happens to all of us. We are the wrongly imprisoned. We are the hungry and thirsty. We are the abused and neglected. We are those living in war-torn places across the world. We are the other. As theosophists, we have choices to make, don't we? This is clearly stated in Blavatsky's book, The Voice of the Silence. In fragment 2, she describes two paths, the open path and the secret path. We are told in the book that we will have to choose between these two paths. The book says that the open path is, quote, the way to selfish bliss, shunned by the bodhisattvas of the secret heart, the Buddhas of compassion. We are also told that taking the secret path is to forego eternal bliss for self, to help on man's salvation. To reach nirvana's bliss, but to renounce it, is the supreme, the final step, the highest on renunciation's path. The book says, the path is one, O disciple, yet in the end, twofold. At one end, bliss immediate, and at the other, bliss deferred. Both are of merit, the reward. The choice is thine. The one becomes the two, the open and the secret. The first one leadeth to the goal, the second to self-immolation. Thus, the first path is liberation, but path the second is renunciation and therefore called the path of woe. Joy Mills, in her book, From Inner to Outer Transformation, says, as is evident throughout the voice of the silence, and indeed throughout all of HPB's writings, the Dharma, or way inherent in the Theosophical worldview, is that of the Bodhisattva, the path of renunciation. Ours is the secret path. As Theosophists, we live to serve humanity. We follow the Bodhisattva path. We have chosen to focus, to the best of our ability, on alleviating the suffering of humanity. One who follows the Bodhisattva path is an individual whose thoughts, words, and actions focus on serving the well-being of all others, not merely in a physical sense, but in the highest sense of facilitating enlightenment. The voice of the silence asks, compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shall thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? We have taken this verse to heart and responded that we will serve until all are liberated from rebirth. As it says in the voice of the silence, let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear before thyself hast wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning tear drop on thy heart and there remain, nor ever brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed. This is the Bodhisattva way. The voice of the silence continues, saying, these tears, O thou of heart most merciful, these are the streams that irrigate the fields of charity immortal. 'Tis on such soil that grows the midnight blossom of Buddha, more difficult to find, more rare to view than the flower of the Voge tree. It is the seed of freedom from rebirth. It isolates the arhat both from strife and lust. It leads him through the fields of being into the peace and bliss known only in the land of silence and non-being. Compassion, says the voice of the silence, is the law of laws, eternal harmony. And it encourages us, enjoins us to become compassion absolute. Compassion, at least from one perspective, is the outward manifestation of the love as described by deepen as the very heart of all that is, and by In Sri Ram as the only force which does not create or add to the complications of karma. Moving forward on the path of compassion requires a great deal of us. It requires that we spiritually transform ourselves through unrelenting self-awareness and objective self-observation. Many theosophical writers have discussed spiritual self-transformation, sometimes called self-regeneration, indicating a need to recreate ourselves in order to serve humanity. Therefore, through self-awareness and self-observation, we become aware of those aspects of our personality that need to be changed or transformed. And then we work to make those changes. Well, we might ask, why is it incumbent upon us to change in order to serve humanity? The conversation of self-transformation consistently arises for us on the spiritual path. Along these lines, Joy Mills, former Theosophical Society in America president, tells us the pathway to such transformation lies in the willingness of each one of us to plunge into the mysterious depths of our human identity. This process, as we shall see, has been well defined in every tradition and mythology. It is the age-old hero or heroine quest of the encounter with the dragons of the psychic realm, the shadows and complexes about which contemporary psychology has much to say. As it was for Dante, it may well involve our descent into hell, facing all the karma of our past, before an ascent can be made. It is the mystic quest of the medieval alchemist in which the pure gold of the spirit must be distilled from the crude material of the personality. She also tells us that in this effort, we are dealing directly with the psychomental transformations which constitute the hero journey of the soul. She continues and quotes Blavatsky, saying, for HPB, Blavatsky, who clearly restated for our time the principles of the mystery tradition, stated explicitly that the next developmental stage in our evolution would have, from Blavatsky, quote, more to do with psychology than with physics. Joy goes on to say, to repeat, the focus of our work today is at the psychological level. It involves dealing with the kama manasic field of operation within us. As said so often by HPB and her successors, as well as her teachers, it is a change in consciousness that is required today. And it is this message that is being repeated by many of the leading thinkers of our time. As we change ourselves, because we are part of the one, then all contained within the one must change. As our consciousness expands, then we are facilitating the expansion of consciousness of all beings, even though it is a very, very slow process. We can look to the words of others for additional understanding. Former international president of the Theosophical Society, N. Sri Ram, writes, the masters of the wisdom who aid evolution, although they are interested in all changes that make for human progress, are especially concerned with the spiritual regeneration of humankind, which is of fundamental importance. Because when that takes place, all else follows. What the masters want is this regeneration, beginning with ourselves. Krishnamurti tells us, to transform the world, we must begin with ourselves. And what is important in beginning with ourselves is the intention. The intention must be to understand ourselves and not to leave it to others to transform themselves or to bring about a modified change through revolution, either of the left or the right. It is important to understand that this is our responsibility, yours and mine. Self-transformation is the work of lifetimes. It is a process that incorporates all aspects of our temporal selves, physical, emotional, and mental. There are very few things more difficult than working on ourselves. It requires not only unrelenting self-awareness, but also objective self-awareness. Working to step away from our personalities and look at ourselves, thoughts, feelings, actions, without judgment, and perhaps more importantly, without hiding aspects that we don't like, even hiding them from ourselves, requires a commitment held by only a few. It also requires tremendous courage and bravery. The spiritual path that we have chosen to walk is not an easy one. Even though it will require us to learn to control, to master our personalities, we have chosen it for the sake of serving humanity. This, of course, is where karma and sifting come into our discussion more overtly. When something is sifted, the finer particles are separated from the more coarse particles, so that the useful and valuable parts of the material are retained. As indicated in the Voice of the Silence quote from the beginning of our discussion, the wheel of the good law moves swiftly on. It grinds by night and day. The worthless husks it drives from out the golden grain, the refuse from the flour. The hand of karma guides the wheel. The revolutions mark the beatings of the karmic heart. Karma guides the wheel that grinds day and night, allowing the spiritually useful and valuable components of self to be discovered. In other words, karma facilitates our spiritual self-transformation. As we move through our lifetimes on the path of progressive development, we inevitably face issues, obstacles, difficulties, and on and on. Our task on this pilgrimage is to learn as we experience these situations so that we grow in self-awareness and move forward in self-realization. We self-transform. We are finding our way back to the knowledge of who we really are. We have been placed, or we have placed ourselves at a specific time in history, as well as in families and conditions that will provide us with the greatest opportunity for growth and self-discovery, for sifting, so to speak. When we perceive the obstacles in our path as opportunities for growth, it can make the situation more tenable. It doesn't solve the problem, nor does it erase the pain that we are experiencing. However, it does provide an understanding about why the obstacle has appeared in our path. Karma is frequently referred to as the law of cause and effect, or the law of action and reaction. According to theosophical teachings, it is a universal law based upon harmony. Everything that we think, say, and do impacts the harmony of the universe. And according to the ageless wisdom teachings, this law, the law of karma, works to restore that harmony. Blavatsky tells us, karma creates nothing, nor does it design. It is the individual who plans and creates causes, and karmic law adjusts the effects, which adjustment is not an act, but universal harmony, tending ever to resume its original position. Like a bough, which when bent down, rebounds with equal vigor. If we believe that we are here in this physical plane of existence to learn and to grow, to transform spiritually, then it makes sense that our life circumstances facilitate this process. Now, it's important to add a caution here. It is our current understanding, or maybe I should say it is my current understanding, that karma facilitates the process of learning through action and reaction, or cause and effect. But we are reminded that we really do not have much of an understanding of this universal law. We are reminded that its workings are not mechanistic and are difficult to predict, even by initiates. In letter number 126, the Mahatma K.H. tells A.P. Sennett, "You know nothing of the ins and outs of the work of karma, of the side blows of this terrible law." And later added, "Have another look at karma and remember that it ever works in the most unexpected ways." Mabel Collins reinforces these statements at the end of the Theosophical classic, Light on the Path, in her essay on karma. In that essay, she tells us that the operations of karma cannot be fully understood, quote, until the disciple has reached the point at which they no longer affect the disciple. So, while we speak about karma as if we truly understand it, it's important to realize that we have only a vague understanding of its workings. But from that understanding, we understand that karma provides us with the opportunity to separate the wheat from the husks, as it says in the Voice of the Silence. It allows, or more accurately, compels us to find that within us which is spiritually useful and valuable as we self-transform in order to help humanity. Our karma, the sifting that occurs in order to spiritually transform us, can be extremely painful, as we well know. Blavatsky put this concept in a different way. In her pamphlet, Reincarnation and Karma, found on the Theosophy World website, she talks about this growth, saying, the inner being must continually burst through its confining shell or encasement, and such a disruption must also be accompanied by pain, not physical, but mental and intellectual. And this is how it is in the course of our lives. She says, the trouble that comes upon us is always just the one we feel to be the hardest that could possibly happen. It is always the one thing we feel we cannot possibly bear. She goes on to say, if we look at it from a wider point of view, we shall see that we are trying to burst through our shell at its one vulnerable point. That our growth, to be real growth, must progress evenly throughout, just as the body of a child grows, not first the head and then a hand, followed perhaps by a leg, but in all directions at once, regularly and imperceptibly. Humanity's tendency is to cultivate each part separately, she says, neglecting the others in the meantime. Every crushing pain is caused by the expansion of some neglected part, which expansion is rendered more difficult by the effects of the cultivation bestowed elsewhere. So let's put this discussion in a more practical light. Let's look at an example. Here's Joe. He's trimming large limbs from the trees in his yard using a chainsaw. He loses his balance and cuts his leg deeply. Does it matter if this incident is due to karma? No. It matters that Joe received the medical attention needed to save his leg and possibly his life. To take this metaphor a step further, let's assume that Joe's life is saved, but the muscles in his leg are badly damaged so that he may never be able to use that leg. Again, we may quickly assume that this terrible injury is due to karmic circumstances. We may wonder what happened in a previous lifetime that resulted in this journey. And we can wonder indefinitely, can't we? But does it matter? What matters is the situation in front of us. First of all, the most important aspects of the situation are twofold. That Joe receive the proper therapy so that he may possibly regain some use of his leg, and Joe's response, physically, emotionally, and cognitively to the situation. And this is critical. He can use the situation to grow and learn in ways that are unique to him and to his evolutionary journey, in ways that increase his compassion and empathy for others. He can also choose to become angry and bitter over this devastating injury. It's Joe's choice alone. Please note that I'm not saying that Joe won't have to deal with the feelings and thoughts that are part of his personality. He definitely will. But he can choose to use those thoughts and feelings to work with them so that he can step beyond anger and bitterness. It's also important for us to talk about self-compassion. We don't often think of being compassionate toward ourselves, but we are as important as every other aspect of the divine. It's probably easier to be more compassionate toward others than it is to be compassionate toward ourselves. We begin by exploring authenticity briefly. Brené Brown tells us authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and embracing who we are. Choosing authenticity means cultivating the courage to be imperfect, to set boundaries, and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Exercising the compassion that comes from knowing that we are all made of strength and struggle, and nurturing the connection and sense of belonging that can only happen when we believe we are enough. When we wear a mask, pretend to be something that we're not being compassionate with ourselves. We wear that mask when we feel that we're not enough. We're judging ourselves harshly. It takes a great deal of courage to be authentic, to let go of the mask, to let go of the way we think we are supposed to be. When we allow ourselves to be seen without any pretenses, without a mask, we act in accordance with the physical human experience summed up by Brown's comment that we are all made of strength and struggle. This recognition and ensuing action is part of our spiritual journey, isn't it? Our life in this physical world has often been compared to a classroom. If we use this analogy, we can consider the fact that every student in the classroom is unique. Each student learns differently and at a different pace. When we look at the work that happens in the classroom, we realize that no one makes 100% on every test or on every assignment. There is no perfection. As adults, looking at students in a classroom, do we get upset when someone has failed a test or has done poorly on an assignment? Hopefully not. Hopefully, we realize that the student failed or did poorly because he or she has not yet grasped the material and needs additional work in that particular area. Can we see ourselves like that? As important and as valuable as every other being, even when we make mistakes, when we fail a test or do poorly on an assignment, so to speak? Self-compassion is accepting ourselves as imperfect beings who are doing their best to walk the spiritual path. Being honest with ourselves and not trying to appear perfect to others is a part of being compassionate with ourselves. Compassion for others is a great deal easier, but still requires exploration. If someone is born into a difficult situation, a war-torn society, or in a location where food and water are difficult to procure, or even in a dysfunctional family where abuse and neglect occur, well, it's their karma, right? We shouldn't do anything to change it or correct it. We have no right to change somebody's karma. After all, they chose to be born into those circumstances so they could learn and grow, right? Thank you for allowing my sarcasm. William Judge tells us, karmic causes already set in motion must be allowed to sweep on until exhausted. But this permits no one to refuse to help other beings. And again, he writes, we should not shrink from the duty to relieve pain and sorrow if we can, for it is both cowardice and conceit to say that we will not help this or that person because it is their karma to suffer. When we come into contact with another who is suffering, we're faced with decisions and choices. Do we help or not? Either way, we reap the consequences of our choices, right? That balance. In other words, we will have our own karmic repercussions as the law of laws seeks to balance the equilibrium and harmony of the universe. Judge also tells us, for all other people, karma is in its nature, in its essential nature, unknown and unknowable. I take this to mean that we cannot and do not know the karma of others. And it makes me wonder if perhaps we are a part of that person's karma, appearing in his or her life at this particular moment in time in order to help and serve. In other words, it seems likely that it is my karma to serve another person. Because we don't understand the complexity of karma, there are at least two components to this situation. The possibility that it is our karma to serve in some way, as we just mentioned, and knowledge of karma does not give us permission to choose not to help another being. We may be reminded of Krishna's statement to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. You'll find it in chapter 4, verse 18, when Krishna says, those who see action in inaction and inaction in action are truly wise amongst humans. Although performing all kinds of actions, they are yogis and masters of all their actions. Now, reminding you that I am not a scholar of the Bhagavad Gita, but a seeker, one can interpret this verse in relation to our discussion. Choosing not to help in action is still an action. Choosing to help can be done without attachment. And those who understand the difference between the two is wise. Therefore, assuming we choose to help, we do so without attachment. We help because we are committed to the bodhisattva path, to alleviating all suffering. We do this by joining with the other person through the universal love described by In Sri Ram, the impartial, non-possessive, wholly beneficent love. Other names for this type of love might be God, Brahman, ultimate reality, and on, so many names for this type of love. Regardless of what we call it, when we act from this place of love, as much as we possibly can, then we are acting in service to the highest. We are serving the other person as a ray of that highest. Well, our exploration has been quite a journey. We began with the quotes from the Voice of the Silence, including that about the wheel of the good law, grinding night and day, separating the husks from the grain, the refuse from the flour, and that it is the hand of karma that guides that wheel. From there, we moved into what may be considered the very heart of theosophy, love. Love, which de Perucker called the very heart of all that is, and impersonal love from the highest. We talked about philanthropy and altruism as the goal of every theosophist, and that we have self-chosen to serve humanity until all suffering has ended. From here, we talked about compassion as the externalization of universal love, which requires us to work towards spiritual self-transformation. This extremely difficult task, as we said, requires the work of lifetimes. It also requires courage and bravery. But with each tiny step of our own transformation, we are inevitably transforming the whole of humanity. We discussed karma as a facilitator of our transformation and growth. And we explored a number of aspects of karma and related compassion to the concept of karma. And we talked about self-compassion, as well as compassion for others. And finally, we returned to our self-chosen decision to walk the path of compassion, the Bodhisattva path, to help humanity from the perspective of the highest. As it says in the Voice of the Silence, "'Tis from the bud of renunciation of the self that springeth the sweet fruit of final liberation." And let's end with this quote from the Voice of the Silence. "The Bodhisattva who has won the battle, who holds the prize within his palm, yet says in his divine compassion, 'For others this great reward I yield.' This Bodhisattva accomplishes the greater renunciation. A savior of the world is that person." Thank you all for your time and your attention, and I look forward to being with you again.